Morning everyone. I hope you are well and able to start enjoying the little freedoms that are gradually happening in the response to coronavirus. During the last 4 months I've spent a lot of time, when the weather's been kind, just being in my garden. And each time I do, it feels like I'm on some sort of little holiday. And although I don't live too far from the centre of the city, probably about 2 miles, I can find a real peace and a quietness in my garden. I live in a little cul-de-sac, tucked away really. And when I'm in my garden, I can hear sometimes the occasional laughter of a child, which is joyous, isn't it? Or the noise of a lawnmower, which is not so joyous, but they are part of the silence, along with the beautiful bird song and the rustling of the trees. And I believe that silence can be a real healer, an aid to meditation and prayer, but sometimes we can see it as a threat, a void to fill, like in a conversation where there's an awkward silence, and we can feel uncomfortable and try to fill that silence. Today I just want to talk to you about not only the silence around us, but the silence within us, or sometimes the lack of silence within us. I don't know about you, but sometimes my head gets filled with all sorts of things, all sorts of anxious thoughts. And it's like my brain is noisily being busy when I don't particularly want it to. And it won't allow me to properly rest. And at those times, I can make the mistake of trying to avoid silence, because I start to think that silence will amplify those anxious thoughts. If that I was on my own for a while and just quiet, that those thoughts might continue to race and build. So then when I feel that, I try to keep myself busy, watch the television maybe, often the news, which is sometimes the worst thing you can do, or listen to loud music or anything to distract me from my anxious thoughts. And it is in fact the worst thing I can do, because the activity or the external stimulation ends up adding to my anxiety. And what I desperately need at those times is to come aside and dwell in the silence and seek God. And maybe one or two of you might relate to those responses, those sorts of anxious, racing thoughts, and where you're desperate to be away from them, to rest from them, but somehow can't get there. And in one of my thoughts for the day, I spoke about a time of retreat on Lindisfarne. Some of you may remember that I related how God spoke to me in a profound way on that occasion, and really brought me to where I am today and what I'm doing today. But what I didn't say was that the first 2 or 3 days on that retreat, I did very little. I kept going up to my room in the retreat house and sleeping, or just sitting listening to the birdsong outside my window. And I began to feel guilty. I kept thinking, I've travelled nearly 300 miles to be here, and I feel I should be doing something to work towards my spiritual development. And there I was, sleeping and doing nothing. And I shared this anxiety, this guilt, with my retreat guide, Ray Simpson, and he smiled and he said, "You are doing something. You're sleeping, you're sitting, you're hearing the bird song, and God knows you need those things, and he has afforded you the opportunity to do them." And it was only at that moment that I let go of my need to be doing something, in inverted commas, as defined by me. And eventually, on that retreat, I was able to let go and let God. Particularly, if you remember the story, after I got into the water. And you know, the lack of silence in our lives and the lack of ability to let go places an enormous stress on our brains, because we're constantly connected to so many pressures, particularly in today's culture. We live in a world that's constantly demanding our attention, be it work or the daily news or mobile phones or social media, all those things and others. And sometimes there seems to be no escape. And we can even be pressured by church, can't we? Thinking we've got to do something all the time, we've got to contribute all the time. And there seems to be no escape. And research has shown that it takes 3 days out in nature to slow down and rest. And that sort of coincides with my experience on Lindisfarne. You know, it took me 2 or 3 days of sleeping and doing nothing, again, in inverted commas. And to be quiet in our culture is difficult. It's difficult for many people. And yet it appears that silence is a necessary part of our functioning, healthy mental capacity. But silence isn't just important for our emotional and psychological well-being. It's an important component of our spiritual health. Jesus knew the power of silence and coming aside, and he practiced it. When the crowds became too much, he went into the mountains to be alone. When the weight of his enormous responsibility was on his shoulders, he went alone in the garden to pray. He needed to refresh himself by spending time with his Father. An early Christian writer called Colquhoun wrote in the 1st century that silence is an invitation to step into the moment and free myself from the addiction to and distraction of noise, so that I can be totally present with the Lord. On Lindisfarne, there is a real example of that with Cuthbert, who escaped to that little island that again I spoke about, off the main shore of Lindisfarne. He went there to spend time alone with God, to be quiet, away from the crowds. And lots of people, you know, in our Christian history have followed that pattern. And I know from my own experience that silence is an invitation to experience God. He once silenced me completely, and it's something else I spoke about, where I couldn't speak. I was struck literally dumb. It's an invitation to experience God, to be silent before him, and it allows us to see and hear who he really is, and to know who we truly are and who he wants us to be. It has the power to transform. And we have to ask that question, can we pull away from the ringing phone, the texts, the constant emails, the Facebook pages, and the unending to-do list? Can we stop performing for a while, striving to achieve? And the invitation to practice silence is really an invitation to heal, and an invitation to know God more deeply. And we shouldn't avoid it or be afraid of it. Rather, we need desperately to seek it. Well, that's another serious one, but important. And well, I hope to speak to you, I think it's next Monday, and hope to see some of you on Sunday at the outdoor service. And you look after yourselves and take care, and God bless. Bye bye.